Hey dudes, welcome on into another video. Today I wanted to show off a little bit of this upper Karazhan run that I did on my feral, and it was quite a good run, and I wanted to just kind of talk through it, dance off a little bit, and yeah, just basically narrate over the key, so feel free to get involved. So for this key, I took the crit buff from the affix guy. You can also go haste. I would say haste or crit are your only two options. There are obviously builds where the haste is going to be a bit stronger, I would say you're playing like a necro build, playing circle, playing savage roar, stuff like that. Haste is going to help you out there a bit, quite well. And just like the actual scaling of how you're getting the haste values is a lot higher than you would say like mastery or verse, right? So haste is quite potent, but I took crit for this one. Very single target heavy dungeon. So as you can probably guess, I'm playing very single target heavy talents as well. Playing Sabertooth, playing Blood Talons, playing Primal Wrath, playing Soul of the Forest. The usual suspects when it comes to single target. And then I'm also running Frenzy Band as well. So that's what we're going in this. That's what I'm playing in most keys this week, as it's tyrannical and everything. And yeah, that's basically like the pre-setup for you. Obviously, I'm playing Night Fae as well. But then in our group, we've got a Warlock and a Fire Mage, so Destro and then Fire Mage, and I'm actually getting Kyrian bonded by JB. So throughout this key, JB actually was bonding me quite a bit, which was nice to have. It was nice to have, I guess. It probably adds quite a bit of damage to the overall, but it wasn't like, you know, I don't think it's like game-changing when it comes to Feral. It's one of those where it's like, if you can get it, cool, but it's, you know, whatever. Now, going through this dungeon initially is pretty obvious. Like, I blast my cooldowns on the first pull that we do, those two mobs, just to get things rolling, get things going. And then we start approaching the first boss. And I'm a bit unsure with my cooldown timings. Now, I have Berserk coming up available in about 10 seconds. We then end up ninja pulling as well, so it's like, oh, okay, maybe I should Berserk here. But I don't think I end up doing it because I want it for the big pull that's upcoming shortly. However, I forget that there's another mob after these two mobs, so I could have absolutely looked to Berserk here without Convoke. I really don't mind in keys desyncing my Berserk and my Convoke. In theory, you should be Berserking and then Convoking just after, and then you can Convoke solely whenever you need to. But I didn't end up Berserking here, which was a bit of a mistake, and then also I end up dying because we pulled two of those mobs, so the AoE effect is just pretty obnoxious. Maybe I could have blasted just a defensive and prayed, but it gets a little bit obnoxious there, so just one of those unfortunate things. You recover, you go again. But yeah, I could have berserked in that pull there. And then what I end up doing is I then get in my head and I go, maybe I should have berserked because I've got this just sitting here and I want it back up for boss. Okay, I'll use berserk on this singular mob, which I think was still worth because ultimately you're just trying to get through the key, right? We have more than enough AoE from the Warlock and the Mage, so like it makes sense for me to just blast something here, especially since I can do some pretty good single target. But realistically in keys, berserk is a bit of a whatever cooldown on single target. So in this situation, I feel like maybe it's just better to save for the AoE element because that's where like Feral's coming alive right now, which is kind of weird. But playing around our berserk sickle window is really where our damage comes from. Doesn't really matter too much on single target, so I could have maybe just sent a Convoke, held the Berserk, then we do this pretty reasonably sized pull, and this would have been a great Berserk opportunity, because remember as well with this first boss, with the Curator, there's going to be a DPS stage that you want to save your cooldowns for, so getting Berserk, not having it on pull, is totally fine, because you can get Berserk midway through the boss, or well, you know, a minute into the boss, and that's when you want it, when you need it. So if I'd berserked here, I would have been absolutely fine. And so that's all that's like kind of going through my head at this stage. I remember doing the key yesterday, and that was really what was going through my head up until this point in the key, is just like my berserk, my berserk, my berserk. But it is what it is. As well as that, I'm also using a versatility trinket, which I got from Iron Docs, which is kind of like Sigil, except it's on a 2-minute cooldown, and instead of agility, it also gives you verse as your like actual stat, your passive stat, and then it's an on-use 2-minute verse as well for like 920 verse, something like that. And then I also have the same, but it's a mastery trinket, and it actually gives agility this time. So pretty good trinket there. And those are my two like unused trinkets right now. And I really like using both of them actually, because I have at least a trinket for every single convoke in theory. And then, well, I'll have things for Berserk as well. So pretty good to have. I like it. End up going here again, and we end up pulling the boss. We pull the Curator, and this is definitely a potential convoke opportunity here. Though these mobs are pretty low health, so it's like one of those where I could see you opting to just save it actually and have it for the boss on pull. But in my head, I'm thinking, oh, you know what? I don't need it on pull because I'm gonna get it for when the boss does his damage amp stage instead. So that's what's going through my head there. You could have easily saved that convoke. You could also send it. It would have been sitting here for about 30 seconds. Yeah, actually, by the time we pull boss, it would have been sitting there for 30 seconds. So I think it was absolutely the right call just to send it. And then on pull here, all I'm going to do is do my regular rotation. I pre-generated Blood Talons, going to Tiger Fury, Rake, Rip, start shredding and generating Blood Talons again. And then trying to kill these volatile energies. These are really, really important to kill. They do a lot of damage, and I believe it starts stacking up and ramping up. Now you want to avoid those circles on the ground that the boss is going to put down. And then when these volatile energies actually jump, look, that circle there on the right where the volatile energy is, doesn't actually do any like damage at that location. So I've been told. So I think you can actually just stand in those. It's just the boss ones, the ones that jump up under everyone's feet that you want to be dodging and avoiding. But the boss now, so when he reaches 0% mana, he's going to go into like this stasis, and then he's going to be taking increased damage. So you're going to see in a moment. And this is where I save all my cooldowns. So this is 50 seconds into the fight. So take note of that if you're ever doing this boss. 50 seconds into the fight. So you don't actually want to use Convoke on pull. You want to make sure that you have it here for this boss. I get Kyrian Bonded from JB. I Berserk, Convoke, and then I'm just shredding and biting and shredding and biting. And you can see on the right-hand side here, where my mouse is, you can see my rotation. It's very, very simplistic during your Berserk window. And I end up hitting at like 30k DPS during that, which is pretty solid, pretty good. And then, like, in my head, I'm thinking, right, 25%, it's only a 19 key. I don't think we get another phase where the boss goes into that stasis, right? So I'm thinking, oh, okay, Convoke's up in 30, I can just send that. But actually, the boss's mana does tick quite quickly, and I didn't really respect how quickly it ticks. But the boss is actually only at 17%. Well, he's at 17% health now. So, and he's still got 30% mana. So I'm looking at this and I'm going, right, even if I get Convoke, even if we get another stasis phase, and I hold Convoke, I'm maybe going to barely just get my Convoke off. What about all this additional mastery gain I can get here? I can kill this volatile energy. I can just pump the boss with some damage now, and then I at least have that mastery amp to continue on. And I think that was pretty much the right call. I think you could have Convoked here if you really wanted to just cheese that extra little bit of damage. But I think in higher level keys, you're probably going to have to... Yeah, I don't know. In high level keys, you're probably going to save it. You're probably going to hold that Convoke. Similar to... I think Curator is very, very similar to... oh, I can't remember his name now. Voltan... No, not Voltanax. The guy in Spires of Ascension. The third boss, the big Colossus guy. Can't remember what his name is now. But, yeah, you'd probably want it on... It's a very similar fight to that, right? And so on higher key levels, you're going to have your Convoke and your Berserk for every single go, in theory. Oh, well, you Convoke for every go, sorry. I think it'll be the same timings no matter what the key level is. Right, now this guy's a bit funky. So this ad here, we ended up skipping a little bit of trash, and then we killed this ad here. But this ad's quite funky. So it does a frontal, which is quite awkward. But then also, it will just drop aggro repeatedly. So your tank needs to be like constantly taunting. Otherwise, this ad will just mess you up. Now, I do end up dying here because I think just this frontal, things get a little bit hairy, and this frontal just kind of gets me. Yeah, so I stand here. But regardless, I use Convoke on this mob. We're in combat for like 15 seconds here. I believe I used Convoke on this mob. And, yeah, there's that frontal that I end up dying to. But I Convoke on it, so that then I can have it back for the boss, because it's quite a high health mob, even on Tyrannical. And particularly on Fortified, you probably want to send a Berserk on this mob. Especially with 2-minute CDs now, 2-minute trinkets, it's like, you can send your Berserk and it's fine, whereas when you're running it in like macroed Sigil or something, it becomes a little bit awkward. But yeah, my combat timer keeps resetting on this mob, which is awkward, so you can't actually see how long we've been in combat for, but my Convoke is up again. And this is where you can make that judgment call of whether to send another Convoke. I, in theory, would say don't send another Convoke because you want to make sure you have it on pull for Medivh, especially on Tyrannical, because it's such a deadly boss. But I could see you sending another one there just to get more uses overall. But I want to make sure I can just go into the boss and blast with as many DPS as possible. That's all I'm thinking here. Now, Medivh is a very rough boss and will be rough, I think, for a long time. He does a couple things. So he can either do his, like, Guardian Spirit stage, his Fire stage, or Ice stage. If he does Ice, the Ceaseless Winter, you just need to keep moving or jumping continuously. If you get the Fire one with the Flame Wreath, then you just need to pre-spread and then stand still. No matter what, just stay within that circle, and it's a big heal-intensive thing where your healer needs to be on the ball with that. These Inferno Bolts don't really matter too much. I mean, they're doing a bit of damage, but it's better to stop the frostbites because people actually get frozen with the frostbites, and if that, say, goes on your healer or something, it can be really, really awkward. Also, the piercing missiles. I believe most tanks actually can just take those piercing missiles to the dome and not be too bothered about it. But these frostbites, you want to either interrupt, or you can use your use the Inferno Bolt to cover the person that's in the frost. In the like ice block, and you can get them out again. Now, this is a really, really nasty part of the fight, I think, harder than anything else, in my opinion, because you're against the clock here. You've got to kill 3 of these Guardian images, and you want to make sure that your whole group is focusing one specific mob. Traditionally, I remember in Legion, people would always start with the leftmost one first. They would always work their way around here. You definitely want to use some cooldowns here if they come up, which we have Convoke. I'm going to be sending that. Kicking on cooldown. Obviously, if you're playing on like Discord or something, you can coordinate your kicks. But you also want to make sure that you're saving your defenses for this, because look how close I am to dying constantly. And this is with JB as a healer and a Resto Druid. This is a really good Resto Druid fight. And it's JB, and it's still looking really hairy. And this is on a 19. So you definitely want to respect this boss and make sure you're saving your defensives and things for this, and maybe that second Convoke. But it depends on the stages. Like, he won't do Guardian Image there every single time. Sometimes it'll be in a different order. So we're just playing around that. Now, this is where I end up dying, because I literally just have nothing left. I'd use all my defenses, and maybe I should have just interrupted the Inferno Bolt. That was the play there. But I'd have to go back and look if I actually had my kick available. I probably did. And I should have knowingly just been like, right, I don't have a defensive available. I need to kick that. Because it does do a bit of damage, but like your healer should be able to heal through it, provided that they haven't just had to blast every single cooldown on Guardian Spirits. Now, this is where we have the Flame Wreath. This is where I pre-spread away from the tank, make sure everyone's away from one another, make sure I'm close enough to the boss where I can still interrupt and I won't charge through my Flame Wreath. Because if you leave that fiery circle, you see it's on JB and Brain right now, if you leave that circle, everybody dies. So you got to be very careful with it. And meanwhile, there's just a bunch of damage happening to the 2 people in those Flame Wreaths. And JB there, we should have interrupted that for him, but I think everyone's was on a cooldown, which is just like, we're not coordinated, not being on Discord and stuff. And then you just have the Ceaseless Winter, so you can just jump around, keep doing your rotation, just do the classic stuff. And I mean, rotationally in general, like, I haven't spoken about it too much, but I think Feral Druid right now is pretty easy when it comes to the rotation for it, right? Like, it's not too complex. You generate your Blood Talons, you use your Blood Talons, you use your Blood Talons, you generate your Blood Talons, you use your Blood Talons, you use your Blood Talons. Like, it's very cyclical. When you're generating your Blood Talons on single target, I like to, depending on whether Rake is at its pandemic window of about like 3-4 seconds. I mean, you should refresh it on 3, but or if Thrash is very low on the boss, then I will either Rake or Thrash, and then I'll Shred and Swipe. So Swipe and Shred are your 2 best like single target abilities outside of maintaining your Rake, and then Thrash, you can just like alternate between Rake and Thrash each time, depending on which one is needing refreshing. That way you can always generate your Blood Talons and never be like overriding Rake, right? And so I generate Blood Talons that way, and then you just use it with a bunch of Shreds and a Bite, bunch of Shreds and a Bite. In theory, swiping on single target does more damage than Shred. You know, this whole thing goes around and people go, oh, do you swipe now? I personally don't. I think it's cringe. Same with getting gavel from Jailer. I'm not doing it. I'm not equipping a mythic gavel. I refuse. I refuse. I refuse. I will not give in. So same with like swiping on single target. I'm not going to do it because it's Goonie, and it'll just, for me, it'll build bad habits where when we no longer swipe, I don't want to still be doing that. But then we move it on to like the next stage of the dungeon. We've done 2 bosses now. We've done the hard part of the dungeon. Once you get past Medivh, then you should be fine, right? And on the right hand side, my like dungeon timer, it's showing me the wrong bosses, but it doesn't matter because it's still showing 4 bosses, which is what matters, like is what counts. I know which bosses they should be, so it's fine if it's showing the wrong ones. That's no big deal. And this next boss we're coming up to is quite an interesting one. There's again damage amp opportunities, which is the second boss in this dungeon where you can get those damage amp opportunities. So we will talk about that in a little bit, but we ended up ninja pulling here with this rat, and the rat actually has a couple mechanics you want to be careful of. But first of all, it'll target a player at random and put a poison on them, which you could just see like Nagura, it puts her in her seed there. It's quite damaging, and so you want to insta dispel it. And if you know it's going to go on you, probably pre-defensive if you can. I mean, this isn't even fortified, and this rat is absolutely trucking the group when it does that. But then also there's this rat wall, so you got to be careful. Come through the gaps here, blink over it, whatever you can is all good. And yeah, kind of just sending cooldowns where I can. I believe I berserk this mob as well. And then, yeah, I definitely berserk this mob. And then, because like in keys sometimes you can hold and you can be like, oh, we're going to be doing this thing next. And like in theory, I was saving everything then for the boss. But then we ninja pull, and it's like, right, well, we've ninja pulled, so I don't want to just sit on a cooldown usage, so I'm going to send it. Because it'll be back up in a minute or 2 anyway, and even if I don't have it straight on boss, I'm still going to get my 2 uses on the boss anyway. So it's fine. I can just send it now. I was only going to get 2 uses on the boss anyway. It doesn't matter whether I got it on pull or, you know, a minute into the fight. I'm still only going to get 2 anyway. And then you're in this situation where you end up ninja pulling an extra couple mobs now as well, and it's like, well, good thing I used my berserk, because imagine if berserk had just been sitting here for over 3 minutes. That would have been really, really upsetting. But now I'm going to have berserk coming up ready for the boss. By the time we kill these ads, I should hopefully have convoke as well. But this is an interesting boss as well, because there is a damage amp just like Curator. However, for this boss, there are going to be these orbs that spawn around the room, and you got to stop them from making contact with the boss, so you want to absorb them. I believe you get something like a 20% damage amp per orb that you soak, and that does stack. However, the downside is that you're going to be taking ticking damage for each, that stacks again, for each orb that you've absorbed. So you can absorb as many balls as you want, but you got to make sure that you can live through it. Now, if you are a mage and you can ice block, or I know that there are other immunities that you can use, but I'm not sure which ones. Maybe you can like cloak it or something like that as a rogue. I believe that you could in Legion. So you do something like that, you can relieve yourself of the orb buff once you've used your cooldowns. Because once you've used your cooldowns, you don't really care about the damage amp. Like, it's not worth the amount of damage it's going to be ticking on your party. So on pull, I end up saving my cooldowns, but I probably could have just sent a convoke, maybe. But that's okay. Now, also, you can clear your orb stacks with those zones. You see that big purple like AoE circle? It just spawned on Brain right now in the top right corner of the screen. Oh, sorry, no, that's actually a different mechanic. But there is one behind the tank there. You can see, I mean, very, very obvious, just to the top right hand side of the Mana Devourer now. But this is where we want to soak up these orbs, and I try and yoink it from Nagura, but we end up both getting a stack, which apparently those are AoE. I didn't realize that before, but if you stand next to each other, you can both get the stack, which is pretty cool. So I'm at 2 stacks now. I've got this Convoke. I sent my Berserk and my Convoke now with this. So now my damage is suddenly going to fly up because I've got these 2 stacks and I'm popping all my like single target stuff as well as my Frenzy Band. So this is like big damage territory. And now that I've done this, I'm kind of like, all right, let me clear my stacks. I drop my 2 debuffs. And when you're clearing your stacks, it also deals damage to you. So you want to try and use a defensive on it or something. Like there's a lot of defensive management in this boss where you can either use your defensives when you're gaining stacks, but I think it's probably better when you're dropping stacks, right? Because normally when you're gaining stacks, especially with the Resto Druid, they can kind of manage it quite a bit. But got my Convoke coming up in 15 seconds. I'm obviously going to send this and not wait for the Berserk. And I want to go and grab up an orb here. Make sure that Nagura doesn't get any. So, yeah, just make sure that Nagura doesn't get any here. So we're going to take that one away from her. So I'm at 3 stacks now. I'm ready to send this Convoke. I'm also getting Kyrian bonded as well. So that's some good juicy damage. And a top tip as well, when you're coming out of your Convoke window, it's likely that you've either thrashed, raked, or shredded. It's likely that you've done at least 2 of those. Maybe you haven't done all 3, and if you have, then you don't need to do this because you already have Blood Talons. But if it only has done 1 or 2, it's good to hedge your bets and just swipe. Oh, see ya, Nagura. I think she ended up getting the stack again. Oh, man. I'm trying to yoink these off of her. Yeah, so you can actually just swipe when you come out of your Convoke window, and it's likely that you'll get a free Blood Talons generation proc from that for, like, 35 energy, right? Rather than having to, a second later, generate your Blood Talons anyway and having to use 3 separate generators. If you just swipe, yeah, maybe you overcap by a combo point or 2, but in my opinion, I think it's worth it because it saves you 3 globals later and a bunch of energy anyway, so it's like, may as well. So yeah, that's what I do. That boss was dealt with, nice and easy peasy. Now we want to move on to the, well, there's still 2 more bosses actually. So kind of weird that this is not displaying it properly, but there are 2 more bosses. There's the chess event, and then there's the I can't remember the name of the big guy, the big eye boy. But this is where I would have liked to have had a nice big Berserk here. Unfortunately, I didn't have one, but this would have been a really, really good Berserk window. And I'm just going to save it for the next pack. But I do get the Convoke off. It's absolutely worth convoking separate from your Berserk. It's something that a lot of people ask me about. And yeah, it's definitely worth it. You can just desync them. Now at this stage in the key as well, I am top DPS, which feels pretty good. And I'm in my head going, right, hold on a minute. Can I actually beat the Warlock? Can I beat the Mage in this key? And no spoilers. We'll see what happens at the end. But it's definitely on my mind here. And of course I am getting Kyrian bonded, which is beneficial. And I mean, is going to give me that extra bit of damage throughout this whole key. But I still think it's pretty decent to beat a Warlock or a Mage at this stage. Warlock in this key, of course, there aren't that many AoE opportunities. But if you look at Season 3, Destro Warlock was so strong that it would beat you even in single target dungeons anyway, just because it was that strong. So it's nice when Feral can get to a better position where we are able to win on these smaller single target dungeons. I mean, I went up against Dan War and Shella, so Dan on his Warrior, Shella on his Warlock during a workshop, and I was top damage on the workshop. And it's not the only time, like I've been topping dungeons quite consistently in things like Workshop, Upper Karazhan, these very boss heavy dungeons that allow for Feral to shine. That's where I've been able to kind of do my best work and get my best results in dungeons. Now, if you jump into, say, like a Gambit, it can be close. I got close to a Warlock in a Gambit, under 1,000 DPS separating us both, which was decent. And you can kind of get to those close, like you can close the gap with them a bit, especially after the nerfs, actually, that just went out last night. So Warlock, Destro has just taken a nerf. Survival Hunter has just taken a nerf. Unfortunately, I do still think that they're going to arguably still be the best 2 specs in the game. But also, Windwalker Monk is still up there. Rogue is now up there. Mage is doing really well right now. I believe Fire and Frost, but specifically Fire, especially with the Mechagon braces as well. So, yeah, there's some heavy competition right now, but it helps a little bit that Destro has been nerfed and Survival Hunter's been nerfed. But on top of that, you have Demo Warlock. So even though Destro's been nerfed, we still have Demo. So Demo's still going to be really, really strong and really a force to be reckoned with still. So good thing we delayed those Warlock nerfs until after the MDI and then a few months after that, or like a month after that, just to make sure that Warlocks then don't even care anyway and they'll just play the other Warlock spec. So good thing we waited on that one. Now, I've got my cooldowns here, I popped my Tiger Fury, I've got Berserk coming up, and then I realized like, oh wait, the boss takes increased damage but I completely had forgotten about that. But then I realized when the boss gets stunned, I'm like, oh yeah, this boss also takes increased damage. So the way this boss works is he's surrounded by a bunch of ads. When you kill any one of the ads, then the boss takes this like 20-second debuff window where he just takes a bunch of damage, and that's where you want to be summoning your cooldowns. You see we get down to 43%, and then you just finish off this second night. You really, in theory, should only have to kill like 2 mobs, maybe a third mob on a higher level key, but you should just have so much damage. So that's what we end up doing. A bit of a misplay from me where I popped my cooldowns too early, and then when I was convoking, I was targeting the wolf. So I lost some damage there. You have to be careful though, because this boss will just start swinging at you. So you got to be careful and make sure that your tank is in position at all times. And then we just kind of slam this king, and I believe we kill him. In time here. I got a nice convoke timed. 1 minute convoke is so good, and it's going to be really, really sad losing that. We do have the option to res brain, but I think it's a good idea to save it for the last boss, because this boss doesn't really do enough to be, like, you're not scared of this boss. Whereas last boss, there's definitely scary moments, and things can go wrong, and then you want to make sure you have your res available. And then going into the last boss, I'm going to have my cooldowns up. I'm going to be ready to rock. So this is a good dungeon. I'm at 15.3k overall. This is decent, but there are definite times where I wanted to use my cooldowns differently. But I was in general pretty happy with it. And I'll kind of do a little bit of skipping ahead. We end up dying here to Quaking. Well, I don't end up dying, but a few of us died to Quaking, so we res up, and then we go for the boss. So we can kind of get jumping into that last segment of this dungeon. But I hope you enjoyed this dungeon and watching over it and just kind of seeing what I did mentally, what I was thinking, pre-planning, where I'm trying to use my cooldowns, my positioning, all that kind of stuff. You can see through that a little bit. Now this is, another one, as I'm talking about my positioning here, right? I get this flame on me. I want to make sure that I can still maintain some good uptime on the boss. So I just zigzag a little bit and make sure that I'm still within range of the boss at all times. That's what I'm trying to do here. Boss has a disintegrate, like frontal ability. You just want to make sure that you're dodging that. It's very, very obvious where it's going, and it's a super long cast time. Apart from that, you interrupt those blasts. The like one person in the group is randomly going to get hit with a magic debuff, so they just got to make sure that they move out and take the portal, like not next to somebody else or not before, or they can go last or whatever. But the tank even had it on them, and they just moved out. Still took the portal, and it like blew up midair, so that's pretty good as well. And yeah, and then we just kind of dispatch of the boss here, Viz'aduum. Don't have too many issues on it. You can check the damage overall. It felt like a decent key. But again, this is where, like, for the Warlock, they needed more mobs. For Brain, they probably needed more mobs as well. But at the same time, it's like, well, Feral should be good at something. It's nice that we are potentially getting this single target niche back. Something I've been noticing with keys lately, like last season, Season 3, Feral Druid was not that big of a deal on single target. Like, it was a bit meh. And other specs were just absolutely dominating it. But now that everybody's lost buff, it kind of feels like people have lost their cooldowns. Well, I mean, they obviously have. They're not getting his regular cooldowns. So it feels like Feral is just able to... I don't know, we've been rewarded more from losing just because everyone else has taken that much harder of a hit, whereas we haven't taken that hard of a hit. So our damage is still really, really good. And we are in a very comfortable position on these smaller target dungeons. But it's the mass AoE where we're still, like, really struggling. So, still room for improvement, but nice to know that we at least have something here. Top tip as well, by the way, when Viz'aduum, when he goes through the portal, he doesn't take damage from his darts. So, like, you can see, he has, like, a 99% reduction shield, where he's just not taking those damage from those darts. So, there's no point reapplying your darts. You should just send, like, ferocious bites and stuff and shreds before he does end up jumping over. Right, now you're rewarded here if you survive to this stage of the platform or to the boss. You get these sentries here, which you can pat on a little bit, and you can see I got some offensive cooldowns ready to rock, ready to go. So I'm going to do just that, but I want to make sure that they get in range of the boss as well. Have the Shadow Meld to drop a bit of aggro. These mobs can be quite awkward, quite annoying. So I'm going to drop the Berserk, drop the Convoke, try and target the boss quite a bit. Just let my Berserk Mastery, like Sickle of the Lion, do all the damage there, and then I want the Convoke to try and nail the boss as much as possible. And that'll pretty much be it. I hope that you guys liked this video. If you want to see like more of these kinds of things, let me know down below. Of course, make sure to check me out on twitch.tv/Psybear_TV. I die here because I got hit by an orb and I didn't see it. I actually didn't realize when I was playing this live. But yeah, I got hit by an orb there. So, slight misplay. Could have been better. But that's alright. And that's my 1700. Nice. So I got 1700 IO this week, which was good because I haven't really been trying for it. I just kind of got it, so that's cool. I'll take that. Damage overall was good, even though I got bonded. I'll still take that. And yeah, got a little bit of loot as well. Hope you enjoyed this one, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.